The 2nd Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, has a proud military history.
There have been a number of large regiments formed over the years. Some have been successful. Very few have been anywhere as successful as the Fusiliers. Those regiments had furnished the largest number of soldiers in the infantry in the First World War and in the Second World War, by far.
We are an extremely well-recruited regiment. We've been very operation experienced in recent years.
It served in all of the major fields of operation: Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan. We have a military track record as a regiment that is second to none, more VCs than any other regiment.
Order. We now come to the backbench debate on defence reforms. To move the motion, I call Mr. John Barron.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I suggest that the government plans to replace 20,000 regulars with 30,000 reservists are on the rocks.
The plan, from the government's point of view, is to try to save as much money as possible, whilst trying to assure us that actually it's not going to create or impact too much on our capability of projecting force overseas should we need to do so. We question both premises.
The whole army reforms are dependent upon successful recruitment of reserves. Now let's examine that for one moment. Let us remember that without the recruitment of the reserves up to 30,000, the army reform plans fall apart. What do we know about recruitment so far? The front page of the Daily Telegraph, under the heading "Reforms have left the army in chaos," refer to documents which clearly show that reservist recruitment targets, both for this year and next year, are being missed, not just by a small margin, by a massive margin. We do know from the Green Paper that it costs more to train a reservist than a regular. And the Independent Commission to review the UK Reserve Forces has confirmed that point. I come back to the fact that well-recruited battalions are being axed, and my own battalion, the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, is one example of that. And yet more poorly recruited, and therefore more expensive, battalions are being saved.
In May 2012, just before I handed over, I was informed that in the Army 2020 plans, 5 battalions were to be cut, and the 2nd Battalion, Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, were to be one of them. When I was told this news, I questioned what the logic was behind that, because we are an extremely well-recruited regiment. We've been very operation experienced in recent years.
Can the Minister justify the decision for 2 RRF to replace one of the more poorly recruited battalions when it was not on the original list of 5 battalions to be scrapped? We know, because we've seen it in writing from the MOD, that there were 5 battalions originally due to be axed because they had poor recruitment figures. One of those was replaced. They had to go looking for another battalion, and they fell upon this 2 RRF, which happened to be the best recruited battalion in the British Army.
So clearly there was a real mix-up here, and it smelt of some messing around with the figures to try and get a solution that somebody else wanted. We pressed more under the Freedom of Information Act to find out whether the Army actually recommended the Fusiliers to be cut. And it appears to us that we weren't on the first recommendations, and then there was some political meddling for other reasons that led to the Fusiliers being selected for cuts.
Given the fact that we've had an MOD leaked memo suggesting that they are failing to meet their reserve recruitment targets, given that we're hearing it's affecting morale, costs are rising as a result, and the fact that despite meetings and promises of answers. We haven't yet had them. We're stepping up the campaign here in Parliament even further with a second march, and hopefully we're going to get the government to really focus hard on supplying these answers.
Were we not promised by the previous Secretary of State that we would only get the cuts to the regular forces if it was clear that we could increase the reserves? That is not going to happen. What about that original promise?
The plan was to say we will not wind down the regular troops until we know the reservists are up to strength. That plan has changed.
And I'm just wondering what the ministry and what the ministers want out of our defence forces, because one of the battalions to be axed, the 2nd Battalion Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, are known as Daring in All. And wherever the Fusiliers have deployed, they have proved capable of meeting every challenge with courage, determination and a will to win. That's on the Army website.
Mr Deputy Speaker, so far the government has not been able to instil in the members of this House, nor indeed the people of the country, any confidence in its cost-cutting proposals. I would like to remind the Minister, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the Military Covenant states that our military deserve our support, respect and fair treatment, and that should be at all times.
TA numbers are at a low ebb. Reserve recruitment targets are being missed.
One final point I wish to make is to urge the Government to consider abandoning the plan to disband the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers altogether. It is an excellent battalion with a proud history, and the Warwickshire is part of that history, particularly during the Second World War, and has an excellent and outstanding track record of recruitment.
The other argument I put back to the Army was that why 1 battalion regiments? We started off as 4 regiments, then 4 battalions, then 3 battalions, then 2 battalions, and if this goes through 1 battalion.
The truth, for some reason, is being hidden as to why my battalion or my regiment has been selected. On the one hand, we hear that the Secretary of State for Defence saying that this was an Army decision. I asked a question under the Freedom of Information Act and said, all I want are the minutes of the final meeting at which the decision was finally made to disband 2RRF. And secondly, the Prime Minister, on the other hand, saying that it's a government decision. I got a reply under the Freedom of Information Act which said no minutes were taken at that meeting. So it's a complete failure of logic. I ask any credible listener or watcher to think that no minutes were taken at that MOD meeting which was to disband one of the finest regiments in the British Army.
Fusiliers is incredibly supported, and Lee, it was a family to him.
Both my boys served with the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, and tragically in August 2009 my oldest son Simon was killed in Afghan.
The lads that served with him, not just the lads, the officers, they were a family to him. They were like a clan of brothers.
I look at my bench now and I just think to myself, well, what was it worth? Do you know what I mean? If this is how valued his life was, that they're going to remove a regiment that's done everything that's been expected of them in every single conflict, what does the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers going to mean in the future for anybody?
And to take away the heart of a regiment, it takes away history and it hurts a lot of families. Once a Fusilier, always a Fusilier.